Yeah, I want to be a community for conversation to help open people's eyes to the real power that having conversation can have, whether it's money or not. Having conversations is huge. We only read articles, we only read other people's posts, we only consume. When we're giving and when we're contributing to conversations, that's super powerful. So as it relates to money, I want my impact to be one where people can get on the right track because they hear that story that clicks. They hear that underlying thread that helps them connect. I had a couple recently on my podcast where the husband found himself with some lifestyle creep and then they were dating and she said, absolutely not. Like, money is a non-negotiable. You got to get on the same page. And they worked through that. And that was a really powerful story of him getting out of credit card debt and stuff and adjusting some of the ways he spends money. And for another couple to be able to hear that story and say, hey, this is how I'm feeling. I didn't know the words of how to tell you, but here's a story. Can you listen to this? And then can we talk about it?
Did you know April is Financial Literacy Month? This isn't just another page on the calendar. It's a wake up call to take control of your finances and truly understand where your money is going. In today's episode of Money Matters, we're diving deep with personal finance podcaster Skyler Fleming of Money Talk. We'll unravel the secrets to making your money work for you, dodging financial pitfalls, and strategies that could potentially reshape your financial future. Whether you're saving for a dream vacation, planning for retirement, or just trying to get by, this episode is your first step towards financial freedom. Don't miss out. Tune in and transform your approach to money this April. Skylar, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited for any money talk, but it's just fun to be on other podcasts.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so I tell me a little bit. I'd like to kind of you have a podcast called Money Talk. Tell me a little bit about that journey and why you started that podcast.
I joke that I started Money Talk with Skyler Fleming because my wife was tired of listening to me because I would tell her about money all the time. I would say, hey, we need to do this, that, and everything else with our money. And then I was like, hey, I could build a small audience. Maybe someone's willing to listen and share and talk. And that's kind of what led to the podcast directly. But I guess what led to my interest in money came from working at a credit union as a call center rep and then a call center supervisor. And I just found so many people just they were in such simple financial trouble that was causing big headaches in their life. And that led me to just be so interested in staying away from that. And I just continued to learn and learn and learn.
I love it. I love it. You know, we've got some commonalities here because before I was a financial advisor, I was in the bank channel and I was a rep at a bank. But even prior to that, I worked at a call center for Bank One.
Mhm.
And I took, as a customer service rep, I took angry customers. So, you know, when I was researching this episode, I heard you on another podcast and you talked about that. Share a little bit of the experience of maybe dealing with some of these clients that would call in to the credit union and you know, what was that like?
Yeah, like you said, they call in angry, upset, like everything's going wrong. It's the end of the world, and it's all the credit union's fault. But those stories are the fun ones to share. But even in those stories, there's always an element of, hey, like this does stink. There's some situation you're finding yourself in that obviously isn't ideal. How can we either help you get out of it or move forward from it? And getting to experience those and help people through those challenges is what motivated me to keep talking about it with other people.
I love it. I love it. Now, throughout your journey, what has been the most common financial challenge that you've observed among individuals, and how do you address it on your podcast?
Yeah, not knowing where to start. So many people just they get stuck because they don't know anywhere else to go. They're like, okay, yeah, I'm spending below my means, but what do you do with that difference between your spending and your means? Like, what do you do beyond that? That's where people get stuck. Is they spend less than they make, but they don't know what to do with that difference. And addressing it with my podcast, that's just where the conversations come into play. I had a couple on recently that they're doing well with their money. They talk about it regularly, and the simple little tips they shared can help a couple break out of that. Hey, we feel like we're doing good with our money, but we're not having any fun. Like, we don't know where to go from here. Then you just listen to somebody else say, I was in that point, and here I am now having fun, going on vacations and feeling good about it. And that's what helps people overcome it on my podcast, is just hearing others' experiences and things like that.
I love it. I love it. You shared with us that some people, they just don't even know where to start. And then some of these, the guests that you've had on there, the stories that they're sharing, that you gave the example of the couple, for couples who just don't know what to do, right?
Mhm.
It helps sometimes to see other people in that same situation. Talking about those moments, those empowering moments, can you recall a particular episode or conversation on money talk that you believe significantly impacted or changed a listener's financial path?
Yeah, I can think of, there's probably 2 or 3 episodes where the guests, their views, or I guess their life views and just the way their beliefs, I guess, maybe a little bit of like spirituality type stuff.
Mhm.
That sort of stuff maybe doesn't align with the same way I think. And I think those ones are the most impactful, where I bring someone on and they say, what if we thought about money in this completely different way? It's like out in left field as far as I'm thinking.
Right.
And those ones where I'm able to come to their point a little bit better and able to understand them a little more. One helps me a ton. Like those ones I appreciate a lot. Those are fun conversations to have. But I'm sure anyone listening is out then able to say, "Wow, I've been listening to Skylar tell us this, and this way for so many episodes." And then it's so nice to bring on someone that's completely different, because those are the fun ones. I had one person who described money as a person. Like, look at money in your life as if it was a human being. Does it treat you nicely? Does it neglect you? Does it manipulate you? What does money do to you if it was a person? And that was fascinating to me because I didn't think of it like that. So those ones are huge. Episodes where multiple guests are on are great because those allow us to hear other ideas from multiple people, and they get play off each other a little bit. It's fun. I had one where we were talking about credit cards and I had two other guests on. And those as a host are tricky to manage, but those ones are
Yes.
fun because you just get to hear different ideas and different tips from so many different people.
I'm smiling real big because you're 100% right. I occasionally will have more than one guest on at the same time. The most I've ever had is, I think I had 5 people in one podcast, and
Good
it was
luck.
more like moderating than
Yeah.
doing the show. So, what you shared with us is that these kind of happy accidents is, some of the guests that you wouldn't necessarily know, and then you're in the middle of a conversation and it's taking you somewhere that you didn't think you were going to
Mhm.
go. And, you gave us the example of the person describing money as a person and it being a human being, and what a unique perspective that is. And it kind of made
Mhm.
you think there. Let's pivot a little bit and talk about, we're here in Financial Literacy Month. We're in April. Uh, we're going to talk a little bit about misconceptions in finance. What are some of those biggest misconceptions people have about managing their finances? And how does your podcast help debunk these?
Yeah, one common one is that everybody else is doing great with their money. Like
Mhm, mhm.
no one's doing that great. And but the thing is when we're not talking about it, is we think everyone, we see all the glamorized social media posts of everyone's vacations and things like that, and you think, oh, they must be really well off. They live in a nice house. They go on nice trips. They go blah 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 blah, right? But I think that's where everyone gets stuck, and the biggest challenge for people is everyone else is probably also struggling. They may have some amount of credit card debt. Everyone probably has student loans, or it's impacted them in some way. Like that's a universal thing that's impacted a lot of people, especially in America. But I think getting through your head that everyone has some sort of financial struggle and they're not all doing perfect, and don't feel bad about it. Don't feel bad if you're not doing well, because that's okay. And that's where I think my podcast comes into play, is we're hearing conversations from everyday people say, yeah, my mom, when I was a kid, she made me kind of feel like I had to help provide for the family. So I was spending all of my money so I couldn't lie and say I wasn't going to help. That one was a eye-opening story for me, to say, wow, you drove yourself to spend all of your money just so you could be truthful to your mom and say, I can't help out this month. That one was crazy for me, but we hear stories like that, and it's eye-opening to say, wow, the other person, they also aren't doing too hot.
Absolutely. So what a great message to get across there, that the idea of that financial struggle, and that a lot of times people aren't necessarily going to share that, but we know
Mhm.
that there are some common things that you mentioned: student loans, and everybody has these financial struggles, but it's not necessarily something that they're going to broadcast, right? And you talked about
Mhm.
the idea of social media, like we'll see little snippets and blurbs, and we're getting like this just narrow vision of what people's lives are, and we're kind of basing our money stories around that, right? But everyone else isn't necessarily doing great either, right? So
Yeah.
so
And
so
we all
share
suck in some way. Which
sharing that is huge, and you're providing a service by doing that and getting these stories out. I think that's fantastic. Let's talk about personal finance from this perspective. From your experience, what are your top 3 personal finance tips for someone just starting to take control of their financial future?
yeah, one thing, the word budget can be a four-letter word to some people, but I like to start before that, because before you can really budget, I like to get people starting tracking their expenses. I think that's a big one, because then you can see, here are my categories, here's how much I'm spending. And that, I think, is going to be more helpful than budgeting right out the gate, because when you try to say, okay, here's how much I'm going to spend on this category, but you have no idea how much you regularly spend, that's where the fear and the anxiety around budgeting kicks in. So number one for me is tracking expenses. It's something I tell everyone, and your credit union or bank app probably already does it for you, so it's not that hard. So get started by tracking. And then second is realize how powerful time is, and realize that you always have time on your side. I think one of the favorite things I like to listen to is that someone in their 60s can still be planning for 40 years worth of investing, because you have so much time on your side. Or maybe you're investing for your grandkids to get your inheritance or something like that. But if you're in your 20s, time is your most abundant resource. So once you can get that to click in your mind and understand how powerful time is, that's when it gets really fun, because you get to say, wow, look at all the opportunity that I have. And then third is talk to someone about it. Talk to someone about how much time you have, and that you just had this big revelation in your life that you have 50 years to invest, and that you don't need to make all your money overnight. Talk to someone about how, wow, I just realized I spend $400 a month eating out. That's a lot. Is that a lot for you? How much do you spend? And then they say, I don't even know. How did you figure that out? And then you're able to connect, and you build that foundation of trust to share those money challenges you're going through, and you help each other say, hey, I found this resource that says 10 tips for meal planning so that you spend less eating out, and then you grow and grow and do better together.
That is very strong what you just shared with us, the idea of people talking about it, right? Because
Mhm.
it's one of those things that there's shame attached to it, and people tend
Absolutely.
to have a problem asking for help. And so you gave us an example of when people when they talk about it, you're able to kind of work together to come up with these solutions or maybe look at it in a different way. You also shared with us the power of time, right? And
Hmm.
so where that, we've heard it as compound interest or the power of compound interest. But the other example you gave us is if you're somebody late in life and you're saving for an inheritance, or if you're in your early 20s, your biggest resource can be time. And then you
Hmm.
started with budgeting. But one of the things you mentioned is that sometimes there can be fear and anxiety around the budgeting piece of it. So starting them off with something like just simply tracking their
Hmm.
expenses, getting an idea of what they're doing on a daily basis, where those dollars are being spent. Those are 3 really, really excellent tips for listeners. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
I want to ask you about the future. Looking ahead, what emerging trends do you see in personal finance, and how do you plan to integrate these into your podcast discussion?
Yeah. For me, this in my mind to the prevalence of digital technology.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
maybe there's a piece in there for cryptocurrencies and things like that. But I'm even more so thinking of just how does digital and not physical impact our behaviors, because money is majority behavioral. And there's always the thing of spend cash so that you feel it when you hand that $100 bill over, so that you feel the money going out of you, out of your system and things like that. But even then now, like, I'm so used to using digital means to pay for things, cash doesn't feel like money to me. That's just the way it is. So like looking at how our behavior and our mental energy goes around digital items, I think is something for me to be interested in. Because as the younger and younger people get older and they start spending money, it's saying, how do we use these digital tools to help us, instead of just feel like our money's running away from us, because it's so easy to tap to pay, one click checkout and things like that. And understanding that and adapting my podcast around is just going to be bringing on people to talk about it and learn what they've done and how they can help other people.
I love that. I love that because what you're talking about 2 different schools of thoughts there, right? You're talking about just an all cash, old school, where people are
Yeah.
paying with cash and they're having to track receipts and all of that, which I've heard that in the past and I've used that as for budgeting to help people kind of track it. There's that painful of having to actually physically do the dollar,
Mhm.
but that's not where we're at. That's not right. We
No.
we are we are in a digital world, and some of the things that you're sharing with us, the fascinating part, the behavior around
Mhm.
tracking things digitally, being able to just spend cash. And you mentioned the one click purchase, right? That's
Mhm.
now we can even do it with our watch. We can walk into the store and it'll just come
You
right
can do it
out
with
of
your
our
voice.
wallet.
You tell your
It's
smart speaker and you're getting something next day.
it's crazy. It's crazy. So I think that is a really good way to come at it and to look at it. Let's talk about mistakes. Could you share maybe a personal financial mistake that you've made and the lessons learned that you wish to pass on to listeners?
Yeah, this one's a fun one that I love to share with everyone, and I've shared it on my podcast multiple times because that's how important I think this one is. My wife and I, when we first got married, I assumed how she would want to handle money. And I assumed it would be the same way as me. I'm a very numbers based guy, spreadsheets, laying it all out. Like, here's the math, here's how the math works. And my wife thankfully brought some more of the behavioral and emotional into my life. Like, it helped me see, okay, I understand now how this impacts our emotions and things like that. So that was the biggest thing for me, is just getting over that hurdle of saying, well, the math makes sense if we do it this way, but the emotions play a bigger role with, like, student loans, for example. I don't have any student loans, but my wife has some student loans for, she's in PA school. Now we do everything joint, so they are our student loans, but I approach it from a mathematical stance of saying, okay, we need to make minimum payments or do this, that, and the other because we can make more in the stock market, right? But that doesn't matter because she feels the weight of the student loans because they're for her education. She's not working right now, and I am, in order to live our life and stuff. So she's feeling the weight of those more. And when she opened up about that, that's the same thing that goes back to when we initially started managing money. I wanted to just do the numbers. I wanted to put out the math on a spreadsheet and make sure we're investing in all the right places, set all the thresholds and things like that. And she's like, "Hang on a second. Like, let's think about how this makes us feel and stuff like that." So that was huge for us in our marriage and for me to just learn.
I love it. I love it. That is a very good point to make. And it's something that it's not just at the beginning of a relationship with couples, that
Yeah.
goes on throughout your life, right? So I know
Yeah.
you're in Utah, right?
Yes. Yep.
And I'm here in Texas, and couples, they manage money differently. Some of them have joint accounts, some of them have individual accounts, right? Depending on what state you're in, sometimes that will kind of push you towards how the state sees the way that you style accounts. But even just the communication that you guys had working together, where you were probably more the analytic because it was about
Yep.
dollar signs to you, and then she brought in the emotional component and said, well, how does this feel? What are we trying to accomplish? And so getting those two together, I think that's a great story to share with listeners because that really helps them with that conversation for
Yeah.
sure.
I
Um,
would I would add to that, if you're both maybe mathematical people or you're both emotional people, you got to look at it from the other. Like, it's mind, like, eye-opening, unlocking, all those kind of turns when you make the connection when you're one way and you look at it the other. Like, it can be huge and very, like, powerful towards moving your, like, financial progress forward.
I love that because there's, the idea of people complementing each other, but then there's also the idea of finding people that fill in your gaps as
Mhm.
well, right? So if you're dominant in one area and you look for somebody who's stronger in the other area, sometimes that works, and sometimes, so I think
Mhm.
it's a real good way to kind of
Yeah.
look at that working with couples there. Let's talk about guest selection for your podcast because you're a podcaster, you've been doing this for some time here. How do you select the experts and the everyday individuals featured on your podcast? What do you believe they bring to the conversation on financial management?
Yeah, I want to hear interesting stories. That's my whole thing, is hearing interesting financial stories. So really, everyone has some sort of financial story. So that's what I want to hear from people, is them saying, "Hey, here's how I grew up with money and how that impacted me. Here's what I'm doing now and how that impacts my family. Here's what I'm doing to teach future generations money." And that's what's so fun to hear, because everyone has this story. Everyone has a story that they may or may not be willing to share. But if I can get those stories out of them, that's when people can make connections. And that's my job, is to help listeners make the connection to what they're hearing, because all of the stories have the same underlying threads. Someone can share a story of they saw their parents in debt, so now they avoid debt, or they saw their parents being super wealthy, so they tried to live that lifestyle and now they're in debt. Like there's always those crossing threads, even though everyone's story is unique. And that's my job as the host, is to connect those so that people can say, oh, there's the connection. Here's what they did. How can I apply that to my life? So really everyone has a financial story. So I'm open to anyone coming on. It's just fun to get to talk about money, but making sure we get to that financial story and share so we can help each other.
I think that is key to what you're doing there. The stories, the idea of that oral tradition, some of the
Mhm.
stories that people pass down from family members to, it doesn't make it past the family, right? And so
Yeah.
when you dig into these stories about their finances and their money, and they have these interesting stories, it may be stuff that nobody else has heard outside of their group, right?
Yeah.
Or their
Yeah.
family or their tribe, right? So what a great way to focus on the guest selection is being able to share those stories and pass that on. Now, since we are here in April, again, I want to focus on financial education for Financial Literacy Month. In your opinion, what role does financial education play in society, and how can we better integrate it into our education system to prepare future generations?
Yeah, money's everything. I'm not saying it's not the only thing, but it impacts everything. Like every decision you make has a financial element behind it. Like if you really think about it, maybe there's a few that don't, and I'm sure maybe there's a couple that come to mind, but let's think about everything we do. Are you driving to work every day? There's money behind that. Are you choosing to bike somewhere instead of drive? Or like there's element of finance behind everything we do. And I think if we can help kids understand that sooner than later, one, they're going to make better decisions, but they're going to be more conscious of it. They're not just going to go out and buy the fancy car because they got their first job or something like that. They're going to realize, hey, this increased salary, how does that take advantage of all the time I have? Because they just have those seeds planted. And that's one thing that I like to do, is have those seed planting activities. I think that's something that could be huge, is the little bit of, okay, we're in English class or something. Let's have maybe a little bit of a conversation about how we talk about money. Or we're in physics class. There's always ways to integrate money, I think, into everything, because it does play such a huge role in our life. So just tiny little activities to plant the seed in everyone's mind, I think, will be super helpful.
That's strong as well. So you started with money is everything, right? And I think that's true. I think there's a way to associate a dollar sign to almost anything. You talked about driving or versus biking. There's a financial
Yeah.
vote there with your dollar, right? And then the idea of just children and kids learning about their finances and the overlap between financial literacy and things that we don't think about, like English or science, and taking a
Mhm.
moment to bring that financial lesson into those subjects is a great way to come at the financial literacy or financial education younger in life, and what you
Mhm.
call planting seeds, right? Putting those seeds in there so that they make better decisions down the road. Let's talk about just personal reflections on future goals here. Reflecting on your journey so far and looking into the future, what are your personal goals for Money Talk, and how do you envision its impact on financial literacy?
Yeah, I want to be as a community for conversation to help open people's eyes to the real power that having conversation can have, whether it's money or not. Having conversations is huge. We only read articles, we only read other people's posts, we only consume. When we're giving and when we're contributing to conversations, that's super powerful. So as it relates to money, I want my impact to be one where people can get on the right track because they hear that story that clicks. They hear that underlying thread that helps them connect. I had a couple recently on my podcast where the husband found himself with some lifestyle creep, and then they were dating, and she said, absolutely not. Like, money is a non negotiable. You got to get on the same page. And they worked through that. And that was a really powerful story of him getting out of credit card debt and stuff and adjusting some of the ways he spends money. And for another couple to be able to hear that story and say, hey, this is how I'm feeling. I didn't know the words of how to tell you, but here's a story. Can you listen to this? And then can we talk about it? Like, that's awesome. Like any chance to have one of those stories connect with someone would be just the ultimate goal.
Awesome. Awesome. Now, Skyler, we are bumping right here towards the end of the show. That was a quick 30 minutes here,
Yes, it always
but
goes fast. It's fun.
it goes by super fast. So, listeners who would like to learn more about you or listen to the podcast, where can they find out more about you in the show?
Yeah, it's called Money Talk with Skyler Fleming. I'm sure you can find it anywhere you're listening to this podcast or on YouTube. And my website is skylerfleming.com. I have a contact form on there. I'm always happy to take questions. Or if anyone listening is like, hey, I have this story I'm dying to share, I'm happy to talk to anyone about money. So I'd love to have anyone on the show.
I love it. I love it. Now, if you're driving right now, you don't have to get a pen. We're going to have links to each of those, the YouTube, the podcast there. That's going to be in the podcast notes. And in our last few minutes here, Skylar, what have I forgot to ask you that you'd like to share with listeners today?
Oh, that's a good one. Just, I guess my mind goes to just to reiterate the impact of conversations, both for the person starting it and finishing it. One thing that's coming to my mind again is what do we do when we're afraid to start the conversation? Well, my tip is to present somebody else's situation and ask the question to kind of get over that fear of starting it. So let's say the person listening finds themselves in credit card debt, for example. That's something that's common, but they're afraid to ask their friend how to get out of it because they know their friend maybe isn't in a bad financial situation, or that's what they're assuming at least. So I would say take a situation that you either find online, there's plenty of them on Facebook or whatever, find someone else's situation and say, hey, what do you think about this? Like, have the conversation as if you're the person presenting someone else's situation. And that's going to help you work through the mindset to be able to present your own down the road. So that's a fun exercise I suggest for people is take someone else's situation to work through and break the money talk ice, so to speak.
I love it. I love it. What a good thought to leave with today. Skylar, thank you so much for being on the show. Have a good rest of the day there.
Yes, thank you.